The digital clock on my wall, a sliver of red against the dark wood, read 6:41 a.m. Outside the smoke glass walls of my office, Port Argonne was still stirring, the sky a bruised purple over the harbor. The city was a grid of veins, and from here, I could feel its pulse. My fountain pen, a heavy, black Mont Blanc, scratched across the ledger. The numbers were clean, honest in their own way. They represented the flow of capital through a network of logistics companies, a far more elegant term than the truth. Money is a current, and I was merely directing its tide. The soft click of the door latch was the only sound that broke the morning's quietude. The new girl, Sarah Alvar. She'd been here for 3 weeks, a ghost in a gray sweater, moving through the penthouse with a silence that was either practiced or born of fear. I didn't look up as she approached, my focus locked on a discrepancy in the Pier 4 accounts. I could smell the coffee, though dark roast, a hint of chicory. She knew my preference. "Your coffee, Mr. Vale." Her voice was a wisp of air. She set the porcelain cup on the coaster to my right. It was her left hand that caught my attention, not because I was looking for it, but because it was trying so hard not to be seen. Her fingers were curled unnaturally around the handle of the tray she carried, and the sleeve of her sweater was pulled down almost to her knuckles. As she leaned forward, the cuff shifted just a fraction. Steam from the hot coffee kissed her inner wrist, and a patch of skin, a violent smudge of purple and sickly yellow, was exposed for less than a second. It was enough. My gaze is a scalpel. It's the tool of my trade, more valuable than any weapon. In my world, you don't survive by reading contracts. You survive by reading people. I saw it all in that fleeting moment. The slight, involuntary flinch as the heat touched the tender flesh, the way her breath hitched, a tiny stutter in the rhythm of her lungs, the flicker of her eyelid, a micro-expression of pain so fast it was barely there. These were tells. In a poker game, they'd cost a man his fortune. In my world, they could cost someone their life. I finally lifted my eyes from the ledger. She was already straightening up, her left hand now firmly tucking the sleeve back into place. Her gaze was fixed on the floor, her shoulders hunched, a posture of someone trying to make themselves smaller, to take up less space in the world. "Is there a problem with the coffee?" I kept my voice neutral, a flat, calm surface. "No, sir, of course not." She shook her head, but her hair, a simple brown ponytail, seemed to tremble with the motion. "You seem unsteady." She risked a glance at me, her eyes wide and dark. They were the color of the harbor at midnight. "I'm just clumsy, sir. Tripped on the rug in the hall yesterday." The words were a thin sheet of ice over deep, dark water. They were rehearsed, brittle. A clumsy person might have a single bruise from a fall. They wouldn't have a constellation of them, a story told in shades of old and new pain, and they wouldn't try to hide it with such desperate, quiet precision. I capped my pen, the click echoing in the silent room. I leaned back in my leather chair, the movement slow, deliberate. I let the silence stretch, letting her feel the weight of it, the weight of my stare. Her breathing became shallow. She was a bird trapped in a cage, and she knew it. "Sarah," I said, and the tone was different now. The neutrality was gone, replaced by something lower, heavier, a promise and a command rolled into one. "Under this roof, no one suffers alone." The statement hung in the air between us. It wasn't an offer of help. It was a statement of fact. This house, this city, the empire I had built, they operated on my rules, and that was one of them. Panic flared in her eyes, raw and unfiltered. This wasn't the reaction of someone grateful for a kind word. It was the terror of an animal caught in a trap. Suddenly realizing the hunter was now paying attention. "I'm fine, Mr. Vale, truly, I should get back to my duties." She took a half step back, a retreat. I didn't press her, not with words. I swiveled my chair to face the bank of monitors built into the wall. With a few keystrokes, I brought up the interface for Argonne Watch, a private venture of mine, registered under a holding company so anonymous it barely existed on paper. It was my eye on the city, a network of cameras and data trackers that saw everything from the traffic patterns on the suspension bridge to the rats scurrying in the alleyways of Dockside. "Cass," I spoke into the secure intercom, my voice low. "Scan the movements of Sarah Alvar. Past 2 weeks, cross-reference with all private and public transport logs. I want her every step from the moment she leaves this building until she returns." I saw her reflection in the dark screen. The blood drained from her face, leaving it ashen. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Her carefully constructed composure shattered. Tears welled in her eyes, and she fought them back with a ferocity that was almost painful to watch. She looked at me, then at the door, her entire body screaming its desire to flee. "Please, sir," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Don't. I can leave. I'll pack my things. You won't have to see me again." I turned back to her. I didn't get up. I didn't raise my voice. I simply opened the top drawer of my desk and took out a small, slim card made of brushed black metal. It was blank except for a single phone number, an untraceable, encrypted line that went directly to me. I slid it across the vast expanse of polished mahogany. It stopped a few inches from the edge of the desk. "I'm not forcing you to talk," I said, my voice calm again, "but I am giving you a choice. Keep running your own game, or use mine, call, even if it's 3 a.m. She stared at the card as if it were a venomous snake. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, with a hand that trembled visibly, she snatched it and retreated from the room without another word. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone with the scent of coffee and the lingering ghost of her fear. A few minutes later, Marina Quill appeared, my housekeeper. She'd been with my family since before I was born, a woman made of steel and quiet wisdom. She moved with the same preternatural silence as Sarah, but where the girl's was born of fear, Marina's was one of absolute competence. She replenished the ice in the water carafe on my desk, her movements economical. "The girl is living with an aunt in Dockside," she said, her voice a whisper of dry leaves. She didn't need to be told I was interested. Marina always knew. "The place on Wharf Street. They are 2 months behind on rent. The aunt works shifts at the cannery, when she can get them." I nodded, not looking at her. "Thank you, Marina." She disappeared as silently as she had come. Dockside. Behind on rent. That combination was a pressure cooker for bad decisions. It made people vulnerable. It made them targets. I picked up my fountain pen again, on the margin of the ledger, next to the cold, hard numbers of my logistics empire. I wrote a new rule, an addendum to my personal code. No one touches my people not on the docks, not on the mainland. My intercom buzzed. It was Cass. "Got something, boss. A nondescript white van. No company markings. It's been parked at the end of her street for 3 days straight, from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. Just before her shift starts. Argonne Watch just flagged the plate. It's registered to a private security firm. Sentinel Harbor." Sentinel Harbor. The name was familiar. A dull thud in the back of my mind. They were corporate muscle. Bottom feeders who took the jobs the more established firms wouldn't touch. Intimidation, union busting, asset recovery, dirty work for clean money. What business did they have with a housemaid? I looked down at my own hand. Resting on the desk, there's a faint white scratch across the knuckle of my right index finger. A scar from my childhood, a reminder from a time before I had the power to stop such things from happening. A reminder that bruises don't just happen, they are given. They are inflicted. The pieces were on the board, a frightened girl with a secret, a faceless security firm watching from the shadows, and a debt hanging over her head. This was more than a clumsy fall. It was a play. And Sarah was at the center of it. She didn't know the rules, and she was about to lose. But I did. I knew the rules better than anyone. I took a sip of the coffee. It was still hot. Outside. The sun was beginning to break through the morning haze, casting long shadows across Port Argonne. It was going to be a beautiful day. For me, at least. For Sentinel Harbor, their morning had just been ruined. They just didn't know it yet. I looked at the ledger, at the rule I had just written. It was a promise. And my promises, like my debts, were always paid in full. He had decided to open the game. The information started to flow in like the tide, relentless and cold. Cass Breacher stood opposite my desk, a silhouette against the gray morning light of Port Argonne. Cass is a man built of right angles and hard silences. He runs my security, a job that involves knowing everything that moves in this city before it even decides to twitch. His reports are like him devoid of fat, all bone and muscle. "Sentinel Harbor," he began, his voice a low gravel. "Their contract is with the Northlight Foundation. On paper, they're a charity. Focus on immigrant aid, literacy programs, community outreach, saintly stuff." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. In our world, the more saintly the facade, the more rotten the core. They've been operating in Dockside for about a year, low profile until now. I swiveled my chair to the monitors, pulling up the files Cass had sent. The Northlight Foundation's website was awash of smiling faces and hopeful testimonials. It was professionally done, clean and utterly soulless. It was a lie manufactured by a committee. And their connection to Sierra. "We're getting there. Argonne Watch has been tracking her routes. There's a tail, a pro." He tapped a monitor, and a grainy image from a street corner camera appeared. A man with a shock of silver hair, wearing a long coat, stood across the street from a bus stop where Sierra was waiting. He wasn't looking at her, but his posture was all coiled attention. Name's Ronan Pike, ex-military police. Now a senior field operative for Sentinel Harbor. He's followed her on her evening shifts 3 times in the last week, never gets closer than 50 yards, stays just on the right side of the law. He's not trying to grab her, he's a reminder, a ghost to keep her looking over her shoulder. A professional spook. This was escalating far beyond a simple debt collection. Have Sentinel Harbor been flagged before? Cass nodded. Multiple times. We pulled the municipal records. The Bureau of Civic Integrity has a file on them. 12 complaints from Dockside residents over the last 6 months, allegations of intimidation, harassment, unlawful entry, all of them closed. Insufficient evidence was the official reason every single time. Of course it was. The Bureau of Civic Integrity was another cog in the city's machine, a lever that could be pulled by the right people with the right amount of money. The system wasn't broken. It was built this way. It was designed to protect the powerful and grind the weak into dust. While Cass worked the digital side, Marina worked the human one. She brought me my lunch on a silver tray, a simple salad and a glass of iced tea. Her movements were, as always, economical and precise. "The girl is a closed book," Marina reported, her voice barely a whisper as she arranged the silverware. I asked about her aunt, her life in Dockside. She gives one-word answers. She's polite, but her walls are 100 feet high. She paused, placing a linen napkin next to my plate. But I did notice something. We were in the main kitchen. The delivery man from the grocer came to the back door. Heavy footsteps on the stone floor. As soon as she heard them, she stopped chopping vegetables and her right hand. She covered it with her left, like she was shielding it or hiding it. It was just for a second, an instinct. An instinct. Those were the things that told the real story, an unconscious, protective gesture. Ronan Pike was the external pressure, the ghost on the street corner, but the real fear, the source of it, was tied to a man's footsteps and something to do with her right hand. I dismissed Cass and Marina, the quiet of the office returning. I needed another piece, the one that always tells the truest story, the money. I opened a secure, encrypted messaging app on a dedicated terminal. My contact was Mira Saul, an accountant who lived so far off the grid she was practically a myth. She didn't work with numbers. She made them perform alchemy, turning dirty money into clean assets. My message was simple: Northlight Foundation. Follow the money, all of it. The reply came back in less than an hour. Mira was fast, and she was thorough. Her response was a complex flowchart of shell corporations and offshore accounts, but the conclusion was brutally simple. Northlight is a washing machine. She wrote, "They take in large, untraceable donations. The money is funneled out through literacy grants and scholarship programs that don't exist. After a 3-step rinse cycle through dummy accounts in the Caymans, the clean cash comes back. It all lands in the primary account of a company called Grey Fathom Dock and Shipping." Grey Fathom. The name set off alarms. They were a mid-level player at the port, known for their aggressive expansion tactics and their uncanny ability to win lucrative city contracts. The pieces were beginning to connect: a charity, a thuggish security firm, and a shipping company, all drinking from the same dirty well. Now I needed to place Sarah inside that picture. I tasked Cass with a deeper dive into her movements, not just the tail, but her entire routine. He layered GPS data from the taxi she occasionally took with footage from every public and private camera along her route. It took half a day to build the map, a spider web of her life over the past month. And in that web, there was a single, glaring anomaly. "Here," Cass said, pointing to a section of the digital map on the main screen. "Amaranth Bridge. It spans the industrial canal on the edge of Dockside. On days she works the evening shift. Her taxi ride home always includes this 5-minute detour. The driver pulls over right here." His finger tapped a spot marked with a red dot. "There are no cameras under the bridge. It's a total blind spot for a 50-yard stretch. She gets out, is gone for exactly 5 minutes, then gets back in and goes home." A blind spot, a scheduled stop. This wasn't a detour, it was a rendezvous. Or a dead drop. "Get eyes under that bridge," I ordered. "But stay invisible. I don't want them to know we're looking." Cass deployed a silent drone, no bigger than a dragonfly, equipped with thermal and acoustic sensors. It hovered in the girders of the old steel bridge, invisible from the street below. The footage it sent back was mundane until it wasn't. The drone zoomed in on a rusted electrical junction box on one of the support pillars. The panel was slightly ajar. The hinges had been recently forced. The metal bent just enough to allow access. Cass had a man on the ground move in during the dead of night. Inside the box, tucked behind a bundle of thick cables, was a cheap, disposable burner phone. It was a listening post, a place to pass information without meeting face to face. Sarah was a courier. Willing or not, she was moving something or receiving something in that 5-minute window of darkness. Just as that piece fell into place, another one arrived from a different direction. A source I maintain inside the Port Authority sent a coded message. It was a single line of text, a heads up before the official announcement. Harbor Commission voting next week. Exclusive night container route contract. Grey Fathom is the sole bidder. It's a done deal. And there it was, the motive. An exclusive contract for the night routes was a license to print money. It would give Grey Fathom a stranglehold on the port's logistics. They could move anything they wanted in the dark with minimal oversight, with Sentinel Harbor providing the muscle and the Bureau of Civic Integrity looking the other way. They could build an empire on the docks. The final piece of the puzzle was Sarah herself. That evening, I asked her to bring me a glass of water. I watched her as she entered the office. She held the heavy glass pitcher in her left hand, her right hand steadying it only lightly at the base. She was right-handed. I'd seen her sign for a delivery a week ago, but she favored her left for anything with weight. It was the same unconscious habit Marina had seen in the kitchen. She was protecting her right hand, specifically her fingers, from the pressure of a tight grip. It wasn't the bruise on her wrist that was the primary injury. It was something else. Something that came from being forced to hold something, or from having something wrenched from her grasp. I leaned back, the picture now complete, the details sharp and clear. This wasn't a domestic dispute. This wasn't a mugging or random street violence. This was a professional operation, cold and calculated, the intimidation from Ronan Pike, the carefully managed blind spot under the bridge, the money flowing through a fake charity to a shipping company on the verge of controlling the city's port. Sarah Alvar wasn't just a victim. She was a witness. She knew something or had something that could derail Gray Fatham's entire plan, and they were squeezing her, using pain and fear as leverage to get it back. The bruises weren't a result of the conflict. They were a tool of negotiation. My rule, the one I had written on my ledger, echoed in my mind. No one touches my people. They had broken my rule. They had done it in my city, and now the game was no longer theirs to control. It was mine. I didn't bring her to my office. The power dynamics there were too stark, the space too much my own. Instead, I led her to the secondary kitchen, a smaller, more intimate room at the back of the penthouse used mostly by Marina. The lights were a warm, soft yellow, illuminating the copper pots hanging from a rack and the quiet hum of the industrial refrigerator. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic ticking of an old regulator clock on the wall, each tick a drop of silence in a deep well. I had her sit at the small wooden table while I poured 2 glasses of water. I placed one in front of her. Her hands remained in her lap. She wouldn't look at me, her focus fixed on the faint grain of the oak tabletop. The silence in this room was different from the silence in my office. It wasn't a weapon. It was a space waiting to be filled. I sat down opposite her, the small table creating a proximity that was impossible to ignore. I had the facts, the data, the patterns. Now I needed the heart of the matter, the story that the cameras and ledgers couldn't tell me. "Sarah," I began, my voice low and even, cutting through the ticking of the clock. "I have men watching a white van parked on your street. I know the name of the man who follows you from the bus stop. I know he works for a company called Sentinel Harbor, and I know they are paid by a foundation that moves money for a shipping conglomerate named Gray Fatham. I know about the 5-minute stop you make under the Amaranth Bridge." Her head snapped up. The fear in her eyes was sharp, but now it was mixed with something else, shock. The carefully constructed walls of her secret world had just been leveled. There was nowhere left for her to hide. "I am going to ask you one last time," I said, leaning forward slightly, my hands flat on the table. "Who is hunting you?" Her composure finally broke. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, and she didn't bother to wipe it away. Her breath came out in a ragged, shuddering sigh. They want something back," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Something that belonged to my friend." "What is it?" "A memory card. From her camera." Her gaze dropped back to the table. "She gave it to me right before she disappeared. She said if anything happened, I had to keep it safe. And if you don't give it to them..." "They said they'll clean out my apartment," she said, the words tasting like poison in her mouth. "My aunt, she has nothing. We have nothing. They'll take it all. They'll throw us on the street." The threat was crude but effective. It wasn't just about eviction, it was about total erasure, a punishment designed to make an example of her. "Your friend," I prompted gently. "What was her name?" "Ivy," she said, her voice catching on the name. "Ivy Nen. She was a volunteer at the Dockside Community Law Center. She helped people with immigration papers, tenant disputes. She believed in the rules. She thought the law would protect everyone." The bitterness in her tone was unmistakable. She was taking pictures one morning down by Pier 9. It was early. Before the sun came up, she saw Sentinel trucks. They were loading people, families, into shipping containers, the ones with the Gray Fatham logo on them. She took pictures. She got their faces, the container numbers, and then she was gone. The scope of it clicked into place. This wasn't just money laundering. It was human trafficking, hidden in plain sight, facilitated by a legitimate shipping company and protected by a corrupt security firm. Ivy Nen hadn't just disappeared. She'd been silenced, and she had passed the evidence, her last desperate act, to Sarah. "Why not go to the police? Sarah to the authorities." She let out a short, hollow laugh. It was a terrible sound. "The authorities, I tried. I sent an email to the Bureau of Civic Integrity. I told them my friend was missing and that I had information about Sentinel Harbor intimidating people in my neighborhood. A week later, I got an automated reply. 'Your report has been received.' That was it. Silence. They're all part of the same machine. You report the wolves to other wolves." I believed her. I had seen the BCI file myself. Insufficient evidence. Case closed. "I can protect you," I said. It was a simple statement of fact. But instead of relief, I saw a new wave of fear wash over her face. She pulled back, her chair scraping against the floor. "No," she said, shaking her head, her eyes wide. "I can't. I won't be used." "Used? Oh, everyone wants something," she said, her voice rising with a frantic edge. "Last year, back in my old city, there was a landlord in my building who was doing illegal evictions, a benefactor, a rich man who owned a newspaper. He found out. He promised to help me, to protect me and the other tenants. He had me talk to his reporters, give them all the details. My face was on the front page. The brave tenant who fought back. For a week, I was a hero." Her expression soured. "Then the story got old. The benefactor made a deal with the landlord, got what he wanted out of it, and he disappeared. The landlord pushed us all out a month later. I wasn't a hero anymore. I was just a pawn. He didn't protect me. He used me as a weapon, then threw me away when he was done. I will not be your story, Mr. Vale. I will not be your weapon." The air in the room grew thick with her panic, her past trauma bleeding into the present. She was on the verge of bolting, of running back into a storm she couldn't possibly survive alone. Just then, the door swung open silently. Marina Quill entered. She held a small ceramic bowl. She didn't look at me or acknowledge the tension. Her focus was entirely on Sarah. She walked to the table and placed the bowl down. It contained a pale, herbal-smelling salve. "For the bruises," Marina said, her voice calm and steady as the ticking clock. She looked at Sarah's left wrist, the one I had seen earlier. "This will help with the swelling. You must apply it 3 times a day." It was a simple act, an offering of care with no strings attached. It wasn't a promise of protection from an armed guard or a powerful man. It was the quiet gesture of an older woman tending to a younger one's hurt. It cut through the fear and the suspicion. It was real. The gesture did more to calm the room than anything I could have said. Sarah stared at Marina, then at the bowl, and the frantic energy seemed to drain out of her, replaced by a profound, weary sadness. She nodded, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. That was my cue. She was no longer on the verge of flight. I pulled out my phone and dialed Cass. I didn't move from the table. I wanted her to hear every word. "Cass," I said, "Plan B is now active. First, Sarah Alvar's current phone. Deactivate its location services and all data transmission. Effective immediately. Get a new device to her. Fully encrypted, by the end of the hour. Second, her apartment on Wharf Street. I want the locks changed. Top of the line. I want a silent, motion-triggered alarm system installed. It will ping directly to you and me. No one gets in or out without us knowing. Get it done before she goes home tonight." I hung up. Sarah was watching me, her expression unreadable. I had just demonstrated what my protection looked like. Not a story for the papers, but silent, invisible, and absolute. Later, after she had regained some of her composure, I found her on the main balcony. The wind was coming in off the harbor, carrying the scent of salt and diesel. The lights of Port Argonne were spread out below us, a galaxy of human ambition and struggle. She was leaning on the railing, her sweater pulled tight around her. I stood beside her, not too close, giving her space, for a long time. Neither of us spoke. We just watched the city breathe. "You're not like him," she finally said, her voice quiet, almost carried away by the wind. "The man from the newspaper." "No," I said, "I'm not." "What do you want from this?" she asked, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. "Why help me?" "Grey Fathom is trying to take control of the port," I answered honestly. "They are becoming a problem that needs to be solved. Your problem and my problem have intersected." I turned to look at her profile against the city lights. If I solve this, Sarah, if I remove Sentinel Harbor and Ronan Pike and the people behind them from the board completely, what side will you be on? It was the most important question I had asked her. I wasn't offering her a temporary shelter. I was offering her a side in a war she was already a part of. She thought for a long moment, the wind whipping a stray strand of hair across her face. When she answered, her voice was clear and steady, stripped of all its earlier fear. I'll choose the side that doesn't make me flinch every time I hear footsteps in the hallway. It was the most honest, raw answer she could have given. It wasn't about loyalty or power or money. It was about safety, a fundamental human need that had been stolen from her. A smile touched my lips, a rare thing, barely creasing the corners of my mouth. I looked back out at the sprawling city. My city? Then I guess you've already chosen. The thread of conspiracy led from the cold data on my screen to the warm, glittering heart of Port Argonne's elite, the Blue Warden Yacht Club. It was a playground for the city's old money and the new, more dangerous kind. And it was the preferred fundraising venue for Graham Kestrel, the immaculately tailored chairman of the Harbor Commission and the public face of the Northlight Foundation. Kestrel was the head of the snake. Tonight, we were going to get close enough to pull a fang. The plan was simple in its audacity. Cass, dressed in the grease-stained overalls of a dockhand, had been on site since noon. His official task to service the club's fuel lines. His real task was to place a micro-tracker on the portable strongbox Kestrel used for charitable cash donations during these events. My role, and Sarah's, was more delicate. We were to be Mr. and Mrs. Archer, purveyors of bespoke marine interiors, there to survey Kestrel's personal yacht for a potential redesign. It was a cover that gave us access, a reason to be close, and a legitimate cause for carrying a briefcase. I was waiting in the car at the designated meeting point, a quiet street overlooking the marina. When she opened the passenger door and slid in, the breath caught in my throat. It was a purely involuntary reaction, a system failure in my otherwise rigidly controlled biology. I had only ever seen her in the drab gray uniform of a maid or a simple sweater. Tonight, she was transformed. She wore a slip dress of deep blue satin that shimmered under the streetlights like the surface of the harbor at dusk. It left her shoulders bare, revealing the delicate, vulnerable line of her collarbone and the faint, elegant tendons in her neck. Her hair was swept up, leaving a few soft tendrils to frame her face. She wore no jewelry, nothing to distract from the raw, understated courage in her dark eyes. I found myself still for a long beat, my gaze taking in the sight of her, a man disarmed. There was a fragile strength to her that the simple dress only amplified. In that moment, my mission objective, the cold, hard calculus of risk and reward, was contaminated by a far more primal, protective instinct. I wanted to wrap her in my coat and take her 1,000 miles away from this night, from this city, from me. But it was her choice to be here. I had to honor that. "You look," I started, but the words failed me. "Ready," I finished lamely. She gave me a small, nervous smile, as I'll ever be. We walked through the gates of the Blue Warden as if we owned the place. Confidence is the best camouflage. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, salt, and money. We moved through the crowd, a sea of white dinner jackets and glittering gowns. Our trajectory aimed at the grand vessel at the end of the main dock Kestrel's yacht, the Steadfast. We saw him holding court on the aft deck. Graham Kestrel was handsome in a severe, chiseled way, his smile as bright and cold as polished steel. He was surrounded by sycophants, laughing at a joke that likely wasn't funny, and standing just behind his right shoulder, a statue in a tailored suit, was Ronan Pike. His silver hair seemed to catch the light, and his eyes, flat and gray as a dead fish, scanned the crowd with unnerving stillness. They never left the perimeter of his principal. As we approached, Kestrel's eyes flicked over us, a quick, dismissive appraisal. I extended my hand. "Graham, Atticus Archer, we spoke on the phone. This is my associate, Alva." We had decided using her real first name was a calculated risk. A slip of the tongue was more likely with a full alias. Of course. Archer, the interior specialists, Kestrel said, his handshake firm but brief, his focus already drifting back to his admirers. My steward will show you around. Do be quick about it. We're celebrating the good work of the Northlight Foundation tonight. His smile was a predatory baring of teeth. Ronan Pike's gaze lingered on us for a second longer, a cold pressure against my skin, before he too dismissed us as irrelevant. That was exactly what we wanted. The steward, a harried young man, led us aboard. While he pointed out the teak decking and the brass fittings, Cass's signal came through my earpiece, a single, soft click. The tracker was live. The strongbox was in the captain's study. It was Sarah who made the move. As the steward began to unlock the study, she pulled a file of papers from her clutch. "Oh, I am so sorry," she said, her voice a perfect blend of apology and professional urgency. "I seem to have brought the invoices for the Wilmington refit instead of the design portfolio. Could you possibly help me? I believe I left the correct one with the concierge." She played her part perfectly, the flustered but competent professional, the steward, eager to please, immediately offered to retrieve it for her. The moment he was gone, we were in motion. I had 30 seconds, maybe a minute at most. The study was opulent, all dark wood and leather. The strongbox was on the desk, a matte black cube of reinforced steel. I placed my briefcase on the floor and opened it, revealing not design samples, but a high-frequency pulse device. I placed it against the digital lock. The light flickered, then died. I turned the handle, and the heavy door swung open. Inside, among stacks of bundled cash, was a small, black object, a single micro SD card with a small white label on it. On the label, 3 letters were written in neat, block handwriting, ACT. I had it in my hand when I heard footsteps approaching, heavy and fast, security, not the steward. "Go," I hissed, pocketing the card. We didn't go back the way we came. We slipped out the starboard door of the study, onto a narrow walkway. The footsteps were in the main corridor now. The only escape was a hatch leading down to a storage locker below deck. I pulled it open, and we dropped into the darkness, pulling the hatch closed just as the door to the study was thrown open above us. The space was impossibly small, cramped and smelling of canvas, mildew and salt. We were pressed together, the rough texture of the stacked sails against my back, Sarah's body flush against mine. I could feel the frantic, hammering beat of her heart. Or maybe it was my own. Outside, we could hear the muffled shouts of the security team. Sarah shivered, a tremor that ran through her entire body. It could have been the cold or the fear, but it felt like something more. I was acutely aware of her breath on my neck, of the faint scent of her skin mixed with the sea air. My entire world, which had been about strategy and angles and exits, had shrunk to this single point of contact, to the woman pressed against me in the dark. Instinctively, I moved my hand, resting it lightly on her shoulder. It wasn't a move, it was a question. "Are you okay? I'm here." Her skin was cool beneath my palm. She looked up, and even in the near-total darkness, I could see the glint of her eyes. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Consent. And then the world tilted on its axis. The distance between us, which had been a breath, collapsed. It wasn't a decision, it was an inevitability, a dam of discipline and control breaking under a pressure I hadn't known was building. Our lips met in the darkness, a collision born of adrenaline and a deeper, unspoken current that had been flowing between us since that first morning in my office. It was a kiss in a moment of life and death, and it tasted of sea salt and desperation. My hand moved from her shoulder to the small of her back, a steadying, protective pressure. I kept it there, a silent promise not to cross a line, even as every instinct screamed otherwise. She responded with a fervor that stole the air from my lungs, her hands coming up to grip my jacket, pulling me closer. I could feel her heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that matched my own. Her breath hitched, and a small sound escaped her throat. "I'm here," she whispered against my lips, the words a lifeline in the suffocating darkness. With you. The kiss deepened, a whirlwind of sensation that blotted out the shouts of the guards, the ticking clock of our escape. It was a raw, desperate communication, a confirmation that in this moment of extreme danger, we were not alone. We were a unit of two, sealed in the dark. A loud clatter from above, the sound of a metal latch being thrown, shattered the spell. We broke apart, breathing heavily, our foreheads resting against each other. Our eyes met in the gloom, a silent exchange passing between us. This isn't over. We'll talk later. There was a service ladder at the back of the locker. It led to a small porthole on the far side of the yacht. I grabbed a nearby bucket of seawater used for swabbing the decks and sloshed a trail of it leading away from our hiding spot, toward the bow, a simple misdirection. We climbed the ladder and slipped out the porthole, dropping silently into the dark water of the marina. Back in the car, soaking wet and shivering, the world began to come back into focus. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, staring at the tiny black memory card in her palm. Her hand was still trembling, not just from the cold, but from the aftershocks of adrenaline and the intensity of what had just happened in the sail locker. I caught my own reflection in the rearview mirror. My hair was matted, my expression grim. I felt a surge of self-recrimination. I had put her in danger, and I had broken my own rigid code of conduct. I cleared my throat, forcing my mind back to the mission. The data is the only thing that matters now, I said, my voice rougher than I intended. But as I started the car and pulled away from the curb, I glanced at her again. My eyes weren't on the card she was holding. They were on her lips. That night, back in the secure confines of my penthouse, we opened the files on the ACT card. It was a data dump, a treasure trove of corruption, spreadsheets listing truck numbers and container IDs, encrypted shipping manifests, schedules for anchorages in unmonitored sections of the harbor, and a detailed accounting ledger showing the exact flow of donations from the Northlight Foundation directly into the operational accounts of Sentinel Harbor. It was all there, a complete blueprint of their entire operation. The very last file on the card was not a spreadsheet. It was a single image file, a photograph, taken at night, illuminated by a harsh flash. It showed a young woman with defiant eyes and dark hair standing in front of a sealed shipping container. The gray Fathom logo was clearly visible on the container's side. The woman was Ivy Nen. Beneath the image was a single line of text, a caption typed in a simple sans serif font. Witness, the data from the ACT card was a poison map, and we spent the next 12 hours tracing its veins. On the large smart screen in my office, Cass had translated Mira Sol's raw data and the contents of the card into a visual flowchart. It was a masterpiece of corporate depravity. The Northlight Foundation was the public face, the smiling, respectable charity that solicited donations from Port Argonne's wealthiest citizens at galas like the one at the Blue Warden. From there, the money didn't go to literacy programs or immigrant aid. It went on a digital world tour, washed through a dozen shell accounts before flowing, clean and sanitized, into the coffers of Gray Fathom Dock and shipping. But the most damning connection was the one that legitimized the entire scheme. Tucked away in a folder of internal communications was a chain of emails between Graham Kestrel and Pallas Reeve, the director of the Bureau of Civic Integrity. Reeve was supposed to be the city's watchdog, the guardian of its ethical soul. Instead, she was Kestrel's pet, wagging her tail for a cut of the profits. One email stood out, a response from Reeve regarding a preliminary inquiry into Sentinel Harbor's activities in Dockside. Graham, it read, consider the matter handled. I've flagged all Northlight-related files for simplified processing. We will prioritize their initiatives moving forward. Simplified processing. It was a bureaucrat's term for looking the other way. Pallas Reeve wasn't just ignoring complaints. She was actively running interference, using the official seal of the city to provide cover for Kestrel's entire operation. The Bureau of Civic Integrity was the stamp of approval that made the whole rotten enterprise look clean. I finally understood the full scope of Kestrel's ambition. This wasn't just about money. It was about absolute control. The exclusive contract for the night container routes was the key. With it, Grey Fathom would own the port after dark, but the true prize was the upcoming storm season. When hurricanes choked the standard shipping lanes, the port's logistics became the city's lifeline. The entity that controlled that lifeline could dictate terms to everyone. They could cripple rivals by delaying their shipments, grant favor to allies, and hold the entire city's economy hostage. It was a power play on a grand scale, one that would make Kestrel the unelected king of Port Argonne. And in doing so, it would inevitably disrupt the delicate balance of power that allowed my own world, the one that operated in the shadows Kestrel was trying to conquer, to function. He wasn't just a corrupt official, he was a rival sovereign. We were in the main study. The city lights a cold fire outside the windows. Sarah, Cass, Marina, and I. It had become a war council. Sarah, her face pale but her eyes burning with a righteous fire I hadn't seen before, was the first to speak. "We have to give this to the press," she said, her hands clenched into fists on the table. "The Port Argonne Chronicle. We can leak it to them anonymously. Once it's public, Kestrel can't hide." I shook my head. The motion slow. "It's the right instinct, but the wrong move," I said. I pulled up another file on the screen, a list of the Chronicle's primary corporate sponsors. Grey Fathom was third on the list. The Northlight Foundation was listed as a major benefactor for the paper's annual charity drive. Kestrel doesn't just have the city officials in his pocket. Sarah, he has the media, too. He pays their bills. A story like this wouldn't see the light of day. It would be buried under editorial review until the evidence was discredited or disappeared. We would show our hand and lose our only weapon. We need a different kind of explosion, one he can't cover up. Cass, who had been standing silently by the window, spoke without turning. "The Regatta of Lights," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It's the biggest public event of the season. The entire city is there, lining the riverbanks. Kestrel is the keynote speaker this year. He's scheduled to announce the bright future of the harbor. It's a PR stunt. He's going to announce the permanent, exclusive contract with Grey Fathom Live in front of the whole city." The stage was already set, a massive public festival, a self-congratulatory speech from the villain. It was the perfect venue for a dramatic fall from grace. "We could hijack the broadcast," Cass continued, "feed our data directly to the jumbotrons on the main stage, right in the middle of his speech. He won't be able to spin his way out of it when the whole city is watching his bank accounts flash across a 50-foot screen." It was a bold, high-risk plan. I liked it. But Marina, who'd been quietly observing, stepped forward. "The regatta is a family event. Atticus," she said, her voice soft but laced with iron. "There are children everywhere. Whatever you plan, it cannot devolve into panic or violence. No civilians get hurt. Not a single one." Her words were a necessary anchor, a reminder of the code that separated us from men like Kestrel. "The principle holds," I said, meeting her gaze. "No collateral damage. The only one who gets burned is Kestrel." But the plan had a hole. To get the full, unredacted truth, the kind of dirt that would not only expose Kestrel, but incinerate his entire network, we needed more than just the A.C. card. We needed Sentinel Harbor's internal records, their operational playbook, what Cass called their black book. And that meant we needed a way inside. "They're a closed system," Cass said, finally turning from the window. "Their servers aren't networked externally. Everything is hard-lined at their main hub on Pier 17. We'd need an inside man, someone with technician-level access." The room fell silent. An inside man was impossible. Sentinel's people were either loyalists or too terrified to betray the company. And then Sarah spoke, her voice quiet but clear. "I might know someone," she said. We all turned to look at her. "His name is June Havel. He's one of their technicians, A few months ago, they were installing new security cameras in the hallways of my building. My apartment lock was old and sticking. He saw me struggling with it. When his supervisor was gone, he came back, fixed it for me in 30 seconds with a little tool. He didn't say much, just told me to be careful. He seemed different, not like the others. It was a small thing, a fleeting moment of kindness in a world of casual brutality, but it was the kind of detail that reveals a man's character, a crack in the facade. "Can you find him, Cass?" I asked. "If he exists, I'll find him." It took Cass less than a day. Jun Havel existed. He was a junior tech, mostly assigned to maintenance and installation. Cass made a cautious, indirect approach through a trusted intermediary. The response came back quickly. Jun was willing to talk, but he had one non-negotiable condition. He wants us to get his sister out. Cass reported back to me later that night. Her name is Nadia. When June started working for Sentinel, they made him sign a contract. Standard stuff, but with a nasty clause. They sponsored his sister's work visa. They hold her passport, her papers. It's labor collateral, as long as she's there, working a menial job in one of their warehouses. June is tied to them. He can't quit, can't complain. She's his chain. It was a cruel, brilliant form of modern-day indentured servitude, and it gave us our final, consolidated objective. The plan was now set, forged from all the disparate pieces of our investigation. The target was Sentinel Harbor's main depot on Pier 17, a heavily guarded cold storage warehouse. Our mission had two primary objectives. First, we would break into their server room and steal a complete copy of their operational data, the digital black book that contained all their secrets. Second, we would locate and extract Nadia Havel, freeing June from his chains. The entire operation had to be timed to the minute. We would leak the data we stole at the precise moment Graham Kestrel stepped onto the stage at the Regatta of Lights, ensuring maximum, uncontainable public impact. As Cass laid out the blueprints for Pier 17 on the screen, detailing guard rotations and security blind spots, I looked over at Syrah. She was no longer standing at the edge of the room, a frightened observer. She was leaning over the table, right next to me, pointing to a section of the schematics. "The cooling intakes for the refrigeration units," she said, her voice steady. "My aunt used to work at a fish processing plant that used a similar system. The external vents are large. They're filtered. But a man could fit through them if the primary fans were shut down for a maintenance cycle." Cass looked at the plans, then at her, a flicker of professional respect in his eyes. "She's right," he confirmed after a moment. "It's a possible ingress point." I watched her, a sense of profound change settling over me. The timid woman who had spilled coffee and hidden her bruises was gone. In her place was a strategist, a partner. Her fear had not vanished, but she had reforged it into a weapon, tempered by a resolve as strong as steel. She was providing key intelligence, shaping the very architecture of our counterattack. She was no longer just the person I was protecting. She had become the co-author of the plan. The night air over Pier 17 was thick and wet, a cold brine that clung to our skin and tasted of salt. Fog rolled in from the harbor, swallowing the sodium lights and muffling the sounds of the city, leaving only the mournful groan of a distant foghorn. It was a ghost night, perfect for the work of ghosts. Each breath I took plumed in front of me, a white cloud in the oppressive dark. We moved in silence. Cass was a shadow, peeling off into the labyrinth of shipping containers to create the first of his diversions, a small electrical fire that would draw the initial attention of the perimeter guards. That left Sarah and me. She was dressed in dark, practical clothing, her face set with a focused intensity that was a world away from the terrified woman I had first met. She was the key to our entry. Our ingress point was an outflow pipe for the facility's saltwater cooling system. Just as she had suggested, the grate was heavy, but yielded to a small hydraulic spreader. We slid into the pipe, the icy water soaking through my boots instantly. It was a tight, claustrophobic crawl, the rush of the water a deafening roar in the enclosed space. We emerged into a maintenance corridor, dripping and cold, the frigid air of the warehouse a physical blow. From there, Sarah led the way. In her hand, she held the key card June Havel had provided. She swiped it at the first magnetic checkpoint, and the lock clicked open with a soft, electronic chime that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. My job was to be the muscle and the technician, on my back. I carried a heavily modified backpack containing a portable decryption rig designed to rip a hard drive's soul out in under a minute. We moved through the first section of the warehouse, a cavern of stacked crates and frozen machinery. The primary objective was the server room, but June's intel had given us a secondary location, a repurposed storage locker where Sentinel kept its collateral. We found it at the far end of the main freezer aisle. The door was unmarked, but the thermal imager showed the heat signatures of multiple bodies inside. Sarah took a deep breath and slid the keycard through the lock. The door hissed open, revealing a small, brutally cold room. Inside, a group of about 6 people, men and women huddled together for warmth. They were dressed in thin, worn-out jackets, some wearing flimsy life vests for an extra layer against the biting cold. One of them, a young woman with wide, frightened eyes that mirrored June's, had to be Nadia. They all flinched as we entered, expecting another guard. Sarah didn't hesitate. She stepped into the room, pulling off her own insulated gloves. She walked over to Nadia and gently took the girl's hands, which were blue with cold. Sarah chafed them for a moment before pressing her own warm gloves into them. "June sent us," Sarah said, her voice a low, reassuring murmur. "We're getting you out of here, all of you." She moved from person to person, speaking to them in a calm, steady tone, her presence a small, warm flame in the freezing darkness. She was no longer just a participant in this fight. She was a leader. I stood back, watching her through the frosted glass of the locker's small window. The cold-blooded strategist in me noted the efficiency of her actions, how she was calming the assets, preparing them for extraction. But another part of me, a part I had long thought frozen over, simply watched. I saw a woman armed with nothing but compassion, standing against an empire of fear, and felt my own armor crack just a little. It was that human warmth that betrayed us, an ancient pressure plate-based alarm system designed to detect the heat shift from an open freezer door, suddenly blared to life. A klaxon wailed, and red lights began to flash, painting the icy corridors in strokes of blood. "They're coming," I yelled, pulling Sarah back as she gathered Nadia. "Cass, we're blown." "Creating a new problem for them." Cass's voice crackled in my earpiece. "West side, go." The heavy thud of combat boots on the concrete floor echoed from the main corridor. Sentinel's response was immediate and overwhelming. They were flooding the zone and leading the charge, moving with the brutal economy of a predator. It was Ronan Pike. We didn't have time to get everyone out. "Nadia comes with us," I commanded. "The rest of you, bar the door from the inside. We'll be back." It was a hard choice, but the mission came first. The black book was the key to freeing all of them permanently. I pulled Sarah and a terrified Nadia behind me, and we plunged into a maze of towering storage pallets. The klaxon was deafening, the flashing red lights disorienting. Behind us, I could hear Pike shouting orders. Suddenly, a canister skidded across the icy floor ahead of us, hissing like a nest of snakes. A thick white cloud erupted from it, a wall of vapor that instantly obscured everything. It was Cass's diversion. Liquid nitrogen. The temperature in the corridor dropped another 20 degrees, and the fog bank gave us the cover we needed. "This way," I shouted, pulling them down a narrow aisle between stacks of frozen fish. The sound of our pursuers grew louder, their footsteps crunching on the ice-slicked floor like a funeral drum. We rounded a corner, and there he was. Ronan Pike stood silhouetted against a flashing red light, blocking our path. He didn't hesitate. He unclipped the heavy baton from his belt and threw it, an underhand flick of the wrist. It wasn't aimed to kill, it was meant to cripple. I shoved Sarah and Nadia to the side, and the baton skipped off the concrete, its metal end catching me high on the cheek. The impact was a starburst of white-hot pain. I felt the skin split, and a warm trickle of blood immediately began to freeze on my face. Pike was already moving toward us, pulling a sidearm. We were trapped. Then, Sarah did something I never would have anticipated. She grabbed the heavy Maglite flashlight from my belt, and without a moment's hesitation, she turned and hurled it backward, down the long corridor we'd just come from. It flew in a perfect arc, end over end, and shattered against the lens of a security camera mounted on the ceiling. The corridor behind us plunged into absolute darkness. At the same time, the emergency lights in our section flickered and died as Cass overloaded another circuit breaker. We were granted a precious few seconds of chaos. "The server room," I grunted, my vision swimming slightly. "Now." We used the darkness to slip past Pike, who was momentarily blinded. The server room was a steel cage in the heart of the freezer. Sarah's card got us through the first door. The servers themselves were behind a second lock, a biometric hand scanner paired with a digital keypad. This was my task. I slammed the decryption rig onto the panel. As its programs began to brute force the digital lock, I worked on the biometric scanner, my fingers numb from the cold, my vision still blurry from the blow to my head. The pain was a sharp, insistent throb. My hand was shaking, not from fear, but from the shock of the impact. I couldn't get the fine-tipped probe into the bypass port. "Hold still," a voice said. Sarah stepped up beside me. She didn't try to take over. She simply placed her hand over mine, her fingers lacing through my own. Her touch was warm, her grip steady and firm. She wasn't calming me. She was anchoring me, lending me her own resolve. In that moment, our hands trembling together but united in purpose, we were a single machine. The shaking stopped. I slid the probe home. The scanner light turned green. The server rack slid open. I located the primary storage module, a black brick of solid-state drives. I had a dummy module in my pack, loaded with a virus designed to look like a catastrophic data fire. I pulled the real drive and was about to slot the decoy in when I heard Pike's voice right outside the cage door. There was no time. I shoved the real black book into the inner pocket of Sierra's jacket. "If we get separated, this is all that matters," I said, my voice low and urgent. "Get it out." She nodded, her eyes wide but determined. I slammed the server rack shut, leaving it empty, and triggered a magnetic lock on the cage door, buying us a few more seconds. Our exit was a maintenance hatch at the back of the room. It led directly out onto the pier, 30 feet above the black, churning water. An inflatable raft was supposed to be our ride, piloted by one of Cass's men. But when I kicked the hatch open, the pier was swarming with sentinel guards. They had cut us off. There was no raft, only the cold, dark water below. We had the data, but we were trapped on the edge of the world, with the entire enemy army at our backs. We found our sanctuary in a place of elegant decay, the Oriel Glasshouse, a long-abandoned Victorian conservatory perched on a hill overlooking the industrial sprawl of the port. It was a skeletal cathedral of rusted iron and broken glass, where nature was slowly and patiently reclaiming its territory. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of damp earth, wild jasmine, and the ghosts of 1,000 forgotten blooms. It was cold, but it was cover. Nadia was with Cass, being moved to a more permanent and secure safe house. That left Marina, Sarah, and me in the fragile shelter of the glass house. We sat in what was once the main atrium, on overturned terracotta pots, a single battery-powered lantern casting a warm, flickering glow on our faces. Marina worked with quiet, practiced efficiency. She cleaned the gash on my cheek with an antiseptic wipe that stung like fire. I didn't flinch. The physical pain was a dull, distant thing. I was watching Sarah, who sat close, her knees almost touching mine, her hands methodically wrapping a fresh bandage around my bruised knuckles where I'd slammed them against the pier hatch. Her touch was feather-light, yet it grounded me more than the solid earth beneath my feet. "This is the second time you've been hurt because of me," she said, her voice a low murmur that barely disturbed the quiet. She didn't look up from her work. "You're wrong," I said, and she paused. I waited until her dark eyes met mine. Ronan Pike's baton didn't hurt. Not really. I touched the faint, white scar on my other knuckle, the one from my childhood. The old scars don't hurt, but watching Pike lunge at you in that corridor, seeing the fear in your eyes, that hurt more than any physical blow ever could. It was the truest thing I had said in years, a confession that laid bare a vulnerability I never showed to anyone. Her breath hitched, and she looked down again, pulling the bandage a little tighter. "When I was a girl," she began, her voice gaining a fragile strength. "After the mess with the newspaper benefactor, I fell apart. I couldn't trust anyone. Every knock on the door, every stranger's smile felt like a trap. I was drowning." She took a shaky breath. "Ivy found me. She didn't offer to fix my problems. She just sat with me in the silence. She brought me books. She made me tea. She was the only one who didn't want anything from me. She was my anchor. When Sentinel took her, they didn't just take my friend, they took the only person in the world who made me feel safe." Her story explained everything: her fear, her distrust, and the fierce, burning core of her resolve. This wasn't just about a memory card. It was about avenging the only sanctuary she had ever known. When she finished tying off the bandage, our hands lingered together for a moment. The silence was charged, filled with the unspoken memory of our two frantic encounters, the desperate life-or-death kiss in the sail locker, and the steadying touch in the server room. I was the one to break it. "Sarah, about the yacht. We should apologize to each other," she finished, a faint, sad smile on her lips, "for a kiss that happened in a panic." "It was a moment of instinct," I admitted, "not of choice. I'm sorry." "I'm sorry, too," she whispered. But the apology didn't create distance. Instead, it cleared the air. It acknowledged the chaos of the past and, in doing so, created a quiet, clean space in the present. It was an ending that felt like a beginning. She didn't pull her hand away. Instead, she slowly lifted it, her gaze locked on mine, and gently touched the uninjured side of my face. Her fingertips were cool against my skin. It wasn't a gesture of pity or gratitude. It was a question, asked in a language older than words. She was giving me a choice, returning the agency I had tried to give her. My heart hammered against my ribs. The entire world, with its conspiracies and betrayals, faded away, leaving only the two of us in the lantern's glow. I leaned into her touch, a barely perceptible movement, and gave a single, quiet answer. "Yeah." That was all it took. She moved closer, and the space between us disappeared. This time, there was no adrenaline, no fear, only a slow, deliberate tenderness. Our lips met, and it was nothing like the frantic clash on the yacht. This was a kiss of profound and aching discovery. It was slow, soft, a conversation without sound. It moved from my lips to the sharp line of my jaw, to the throbbing cut on my cheek, a silent promise to heal. I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her into my lap. She felt impossibly fragile and yet unshakably strong. The glass house was filled with dew, our breaths misting in the cold air, mingling together. My hand slid from her shoulder down the elegant curve of her back, stopping at her waist, holding her firmly but gently. I would go no further. This was not about possession. It was about sanctuary. She smiled into the kiss, a small, breathy sound of contentment, and rested her forehead against mine, her chest rising and falling against my own. "Don't ever make me a weapon, Atticus," she whispered, her deepest fear laid bare in the darkness. I held her tighter, a fierce, protective surge rising within me. "No one touches you, Sarah," I vowed, my voice rough with an emotion I couldn't name. "Not even me. Not unless you want them to." She sighed, a sound of release, of a great and heavy weight being set down. She curled into me, and we stayed like that, wrapped in a thick wool blanket Marina had left for us. As the night deepened, The wind in the broken panes of glass was the only music we needed. I woke to the first gray light of dawn filtering through the grimy glass. Sarah was asleep in my arms, her face peaceful in a way I had never seen it before. The air smelled of damp leaves and cold earth, the barrier between us, the one defined by my power and her vulnerability, had dissolved in the night. We were no longer protector and protected. We were allies. We were something more. My encrypted phone buzzed, a harsh intrusion into the morning's peace. It was a message from Cass. I read it, and the cold of the glass house seeped into my bones. Bad news. We have a traitor, Eldon Voss. He was one of the men I had watching Sierra's aunt. Looks like he was on Kestrel's payroll the whole time. He just made a call. Sentinel knows where we are. They're on their way. Eldon Voss, one of my own, a man I had trusted. The betrayal was a sharp, ugly sting. Sarah stirred, woken by the tension that had suddenly filled my body. She looked at the message on my phone, then at my face. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice clear, with no trace of sleep. The instinct for retribution was a roar in my blood. I wanted to hunt Eldon Voss down, to make him pay for his treason in the old way. But I looked at Sarah, at the mission we had started, at the black book that was still tucked safely in her jacket. My personal anger was a fire, but the mission was a flood, and it had to take precedence. "Vengeance is a luxury," I said, my voice hard as stone. "Justice is a necessity. We focus on the regatta. We finish Kestrel. I'll deal with Voss after." She nodded, accepting my decision without question. We were a unit. As we prepared to move out, gathering our meager supplies before Sentinel's forces could arrive, she stopped me at the door. She took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Atticus," she said, her eyes locking onto mine, "if something happens, if I don't make it, if I disappear, you have to be the one to go on stage. You have to use the data. You have to do it for Ivy." I covered her hand with mine, my gaze unwavering. "There is no if," I said, the words a vow. "We do this together." She searched my face for a long moment, and whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her. "Okay," she whispered. "Together." We looked at each other, and in that silent, urgent moment, a final pact was forged between us. Absolute trust. No more secrets. No matter what came next, the peace of the dawn was a fragile, fleeting thing. It was shattered not by a gunshot, but by the crunch of gravel under the tires of heavy vehicles. Cass's warning had been timely, but just barely. Through a cracked pane of glass, I saw them 2 black SUVs and a white van, the same one that had haunted Sarah's street, disgorging a dozen men in dark tactical gear. Sentinel had come to collect. They were fanning out, forming a perimeter, their movements efficient and utterly without mercy. "The old service tunnels," Marina said, her voice as calm as if she were announcing dinner. "They run from the glasshouse's foundation all the way to the old harbor. They're not on any city map." She led us to a root cellar beneath the main atrium, where a rusted iron wheel was set into the stone floor. It took my full strength to turn it. With a groan of protest, a section of the floor ground open, revealing a set of stone steps leading down into absolute blackness. The air that rose up was ancient and cold, smelling of brine and wet limestone. "The tide tunnels," I said, recognizing the local legend. They were relics from the city's founding, carved out before modern engineering. "Go," I ordered, handing headlamps to Marina and Sarah. "Nadia, you stay between them." We descended into the earth, the darkness swallowing us whole. I pulled the stone door shut above us, the boom echoing down the tunnel, sealing us in. The only light came from the wavering beams of our headlamps, cutting feeble paths through the oppressive dark. The tunnel was narrow, the limestone walls slick with moisture and weeping cold water. The ground was uneven, and a channel of brackish water, about a foot deep, flowed down the center. The tide was coming in. I could feel it, a subtle shift in the pressure of the air, a quickening of the current around our ankles. The water level was rising, slowly but inexorably. Nadia began to panic. Her breath came in short, terrified gasps that bordered on hyperventilation. "I can't," she whimpered, her eyes wide in the bouncing light of her headlamp. "The walls, the water." Marina tried to soothe her, but it was Sarah who broke through the girl's fear. She put her arm around Nadia's shoulders, pulling her close as they waded through the rising water. "Look at me." "Nadia," she said, her voice a calm, steady anchor in the chaos. "Just listen to my voice. When I was a little girl, my father used to take me to the tidal pools. He taught me how to read them. There's a rhythm to it. See, there's the low tide, the slack tide, and the high tide. This," she said, gesturing to the water now swirling around our knees, "this is just the flood tide. It's in a hurry to get where it's going, but it's predictable. It's just water. Breathe with me. In for 4, out for 4. Match the rhythm of the water." She began to count, her voice a steady beat against the sound of the rushing water. Miraculously, Nadia's panicked breathing began to even out, syncing with Sarah's count. She had taken her own trauma and turned it into medicine for someone else. Our progress was slow and treacherous. Then we heard it, a metallic clang from far behind us. They had found the entrance. Shouted commands echoed down the tunnel, distorted and monstrous, and then the sharp crack of a gunshot, a slug whined off the stone wall a dozen feet from us, showering the dark water with sparks. Ronan Pike was on the hunt. "Move!" I roared. We pushed on, the water now at our waists, its icy grip trying to pull us down. We reached a junction where the tunnel split. According to the old schematics I had memorized, the left fork was a dead end, collapsing after 50 yards. It was our only chance to slow them down. From a waterproof pouch on my belt, I pulled a small, clay-like charge. It wasn't a lethal explosive. It was a limestone catalyst charge, designed for demolition. It would react with the damp limestone of the tunnel walls, causing a rapid, crumbling expansion that would seal the tunnel without a lethal, concussive blast, violence without murder. It was a fine line to walk, but it was my line. I packed it into a fissure in the ceiling of the left fork and set the 30-second timer. "This way, run!" I yelled, shoving them down the main tunnel. We scrambled through the chest-deep water as the timer ticked down. The charge went off with a deep, grinding roar, not a sharp explosion. The entire tunnel shuddered, and behind us, the ceiling of the side passage collapsed in a cascade of rock and churning water. We had bought ourselves time. In the chaos of the collapse, the surge of displaced water hit us like a wave. Sarah, who was just ahead of me, lost her footing on the slick stone. I saw her go down, her headlamp disappearing beneath the black water. My heart stopped. I lunged, my hand closing around her waist in a desperate, blind grip. I pulled her up, her body limp for a second before she sputtered, coughing up briny water. The current slammed us against the tunnel wall, my body shielding hers from the impact. For a single, breathless moment, our faces were inches apart, our headlamps illuminating the terror and relief in each other's eyes. It was a look that said everything. "Don't you dare leave me." We finally saw a sliver of gray light ahead, a maintenance ladder, rusted but intact, led straight up. I sent Marina and Nadia up first, then Sarah. As she climbed, I looked back down the dark, flooded tunnel. Pike was delayed, not stopped. We were still running on borrowed time. We emerged through a manhole into a blast of noise, light and smells. We were in the heart of the Lantern Fish Market, a chaotic open-air bazaar that ran 24 hours a day. The air was thick with the scent of fish, diesel, and frying food. Brightly colored lanterns hung everywhere, casting a festive glow on the throng of people. We were soaked, covered in filth, but in the chaos of the market, we were just another strange sight. Marina was there, just as planned, standing beside a large, refrigerated truck used for hauling crushed ice. "Get in the back," she said, her expression grim. "Cass is handling the welcome party." As if on cue, a loud whoosh and a bright orange glow erupted from a warehouse at the far end of the market. Black smoke began to billow into the night sky. Screams and shouts followed as people began to run away from the fire. It was Cass's second diversion, a manufactured crisis to pull Sentinel's forces away from us. "Now," Marina ordered. She opened the back of the truck, revealing a large, open-topped bin half filled with glistening crushed ice. All the way down." There was no time to argue. Atticus, Sarah, and Nadia climbed in, burying ourselves in the biting cold of the ice. The cold was a physical shock, sucking the breath from my lungs. Marina slammed the doors shut, plunging us into a frigid, suffocating darkness. We lay there, shivering, listening to the muffled sounds of the market turning to panic. We heard the sirens, then the heavy, running footsteps of Sentinel's men right outside the truck. We held our breath, the only sound the frantic beating of our own hearts. The footsteps passed. A minute later, the truck's engine rumbled to life, and we began to move. Inside my coat, the encrypted radio I'd given Cass crackled, but it wasn't Cass's voice that came through. It was the calm, familiar voice of the traitor, Eldon Voss. "Boss, you there, you need to hear this. I'm still in their comms loop." My blood ran cold. Voss wasn't just a traitor. He was playing a double game. Or was this another deception? It's not just about the contract anymore. Kestrel is escalating. He's got a device, an explosive. He's planting it on the main stage at the regatta. The plan is to detonate it during his speech and blame it on the dockworker gangs. It's his final solution. He'll create a tragedy and then step in as the city's savior, the only one who can bring order. The commission will give him anything he wants after that. The rage that surged through me was a white-hot, blinding force. Kestrel wasn't just corrupt. He was a monster, willing to sacrifice innocent families to achieve his goals. My hand clenched into a fist, my knuckles pressing into the sharp ice. I forced myself to breathe, to push the rage down. Vengeance could wait. Survival came first. "We're changing the plan," I said, my voice coming out as a harsh rasp to the small group huddled in the ice. "We can't just expose him. We have to stop him." My mind raced, formulating the final, desperate gambit. We give the black book to the media, but we hold one piece back, the intel on the explosive. Leaking that will cause a mass panic. We can't risk it. We'll give everything else to Lighthouse TV. They're the only independent news channel in this city with the guts to run the story. "But who will take it to them?" Marina's voice came from the darkness. "They'll be watching all of us." A small, shivering form stirred beside me. "I'll do it," Sarah said. Her voice was trembling from the cold, but her words were solid as rock. "They're looking for you. They're looking for a soldier or a spy. They're not looking for a housemaid. I don't have a record. I can walk right in there. I can be the one to give them the USB. I can do it for Ivy." I looked at her, a silhouette in the freezing dark. She was volunteering to walk into the fire, to be the messenger at the heart of the storm. She was no longer a pawn. She was a queen, making her own move. "Okay," I said, the single word a pact of absolute trust. "You handle the truth, I'll handle the bomb." The Argonne River was a ribbon of liquid fire, a flowing tapestry of red, gold, and blue from the thousands of paper lanterns drifting on its surface. The annual Regatta of Lights was in full swing, a beautiful lie painted over the city's dark heart, to the cheering crowds lining the banks. It was a night of celebration. To me, it was a stage set for a slaughter, with a ticking clock only I could hear. Sarah moved through the media enclosure near the main stage like a ghost, dressed in a dark windbreaker and a simple baseball cap pulled low. She was invisible, just another anonymous member of the event support staff. The credentials Cass had forged were perfect. I watched her on a small, encrypted feed from a camera Cass had planted earlier, my heart a cold, tight knot in my chest. She was looking for the Lighthouse TV crew, her movements calm and deliberate. She had the black book, our entire war, on a USB drive no bigger than her thumbnail. My own path was darker and far less glamorous. I moved through the labyrinth of scaffolding and cables beneath the main stage, the cheerful pop music from the speakers above, a thumping, ironic soundtrack to my mission. The schematic Eldon Voss had provided was my only guide. a map of this steel and wire underworld. The air was cool and smelled of river water and ozone. My target was a large, black sound reinforcement box bolted to one of the main support pylons, model C-Voice 12. According to Voss, Kestrel's device was inside, wired directly into the master power grid. I found it. It looked inert, just another piece of audio equipment, but a closer look revealed fresh tampering with the access panel. This was the place. As I reached for my toolkit, a beam of light sliced through the darkness, catching me in its glare. "Well, well," a familiar voice growled. Ronan Pike stood at the far end of the walkway, his massive frame blocking the only easy exit. "Fancy meeting you here." He raised a radio to his mouth. "He's under the stage. West Pylon. Box him in." My earpiece crackled. "I see him," Cass's voice said, cool as ice. "Buy me 10 seconds. Pike started moving toward me, not with the speed of an assassin, but with the lumbering confidence of a bear that knows its prey is trapped. Before he could close the distance, a series of brilliant white flashes lit up the sky over the river. A shower of marine distress flares, fired from a service boat Cass had positioned an hour ago. The stage lights above us flickered wildly in response to the sudden power surge Cass had created. The crowd roared, thinking it was part of the show. Pike was momentarily distracted, his head turning toward the unexpected light show. It was the only opening I needed. I didn't run. I moved deeper into the darkness, toward the bomb. On the stage level, Sarah saw her chance in the manufactured chaos. She spotted the Lighthouse TV logo on a camera. She moved toward the operator, but it was a woman with a headset and a clipboard she targeted, Jo Ansel, the station's senior field editor, a woman with a reputation for journalistic ferocity. "Miss Ansel," Sarah said, her voice steady, "I have a delivery for you, a story." Ansel gave her a dismissive look. "Get in line, kid. We're live in 5. "The password is Ivy Nen," Sarah said, holding out the small USB drive. The editor's face changed instantly. The professional impatience vanished, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. The name was a key, one that unlocked a story she had likely been chasing for months. She took the USB without a word, her eyes locking with Sarah's. She understood. She turned to her audio tech. "Switch to the backup broadcast feed. Now, on my signal." The moment of truth had arrived. The festival's master of ceremonies announced the keynote speaker. Graham Kestrel walked onto the stage to a wave of polite applause, his smile a perfect mask of civic virtue. He stepped up to the podium, the massive screens on either side of the stage showing a close-up of his handsome, treacherous face. "My friends, my fellow citizens of Port Argonne," he began, his voice booming across the river. "Tonight we celebrate not just these beautiful lights, but a new dawn for our city, a dawn of integrity, a clean harbor for a bright future." "Now," Jo Ansel said into her microphone. The screens behind Kestrel flickered. His face vanished, replaced by the cold, hard lines of a bank ledger. Arrows showed the flow of money from the Northlight Foundation's donation account through a web of offshore shells and directly into the operating budget of Sentinel Harbor and Grey Fathom Shipping. The crowd's applause faltered, replaced by a confused murmur. Then came the next image, a picture of Ivy Nen, her face projected 50 feet high. Then a photo of the container, the Grey Fathom logo stark and undeniable. Then the damning email from Palace Reeve, her promise to provide simplified processing for Kestrel's criminal enterprise. The murmur in the crowd grew into a roar of shock and anger. Kestrel's smile froze. He tried to laugh it off. "It seems we're having some technical difficulties," he shouted into the microphone, a pathetic attempt by my rivals to spread fabricated, malicious lies. Beneath the stage, I had the panel of the C-Voice 12 open. The device was crude but effective, a block of plastic explosive wired to a digital timer and a remote receiver. I found the primary detonator wire. With a steady hand, I pulled it free from the timer, But my relief was short-lived. A second, thinner wire snaked from the explosive block to a small, secondary receiver I hadn't seen. A fail-safe. Before I could reach it, I was hit from the side. Ronan Pike slammed me against the steel pylon. The air exploded from my lungs. He was a brute, all muscle and rage. We grappled in the tight, dark space, the roar of the angry crowd above us a surreal backdrop to our silent, deadly struggle. He drove a knee into my ribs, and I saw stars. I lashed out with my foot, catching him on the knee, and he grunted in pain. He pushed me back, my heels skidding on the damp metal walkway. I was inches from the edge, with nothing but the dark, swirling river below. Up above, Sarah had been making her way to the designated extraction point behind the media tent, but she saw the fight. On one of the live camera feeds, she saw the understage angle. My desperate struggle with Pike. She saw my foot slip. Her heart, she told me later, simply stopped. She abandoned safety. She abandoned the plan. She ran to the side of the stage and, without a second's hesitation, swung herself over the railing and onto a service ladder, scrambling down into the darkness beneath the stage. Pike had me pinned, his massive forearm crushing against my throat, my vision starting to dim at the edges. He was fumbling in his jacket pocket with his free hand for the remote. Sarah landed on the walkway behind him, silent as a cat. He was so focused on finishing me that he didn't hear her. She didn't attack him. She didn't scream. She did something smarter. She lunged for the jacket pocket he was reaching for, her small hand diving inside. She pulled out a small, black remote trigger, the secondary detonator. Without looking at it, she threw it over the edge of the walkway. It hit the dark water with a faint splash. Pike roared in frustration, turning his head, finally aware of her. He swung a backhand, a blow that would have been devastating. But his momentary distraction was all I needed. I drove my head forward into his face with every ounce of strength I had left. There was a sickening crunch of cartilage. He staggered back, giving me the space I needed. I twisted, hooked my leg behind his, and threw my weight into him. We both went down, and I came out on top, my forearm now pressed against his throat. I pinned his arm, and with a plastic zip tie from my toolkit, I bound his hands behind his back. It was over. He lay there, breathing heavily, and I rolled off him, gasping for air. Sarah rushed to my side, her face streaked with grime, her eyes wide with fear and relief. Her forehead was beaded with sweat mixed with the fine dust of the understage. We just looked at each other for a long moment, the chaos above us fading to a dull roar. "It's over," she breathed, and in that moment, she was right. On the stage, the final blow was landing. Lighthouse TV was now broadcasting the ACT files, showing that a federal task force had opened an investigation into Gray Fathom, only to have it shut down by the Bureau of Civic Integrity for insufficient grounds. The crowd was on its feet, shouting, pointing at the stage. Blue flashing lights appeared on the river as boats from the Maritime Special Authority, alerted by Cass, began to converge on the festival, their objective to secure the area. Kestrel, his face a mask of pale, sweating panic, tried to make a run for it, pushing his way through the backstage crew, but his path was blocked by a small, unassuming woman in a simple dress, Marina Quill. She stepped up to a live microphone on a stand, and in a voice that was calm, clear, and colder than the river itself, she spoke a simple epitaph that was broadcast to the entire city. "Mr. Kestrel," she said, her voice cutting through the noise, "you've just lost this city." The chaos that erupted was a tidal wave. On the massive screens, Pallas Reeve, director of the Bureau of Civic Integrity, had just stepped in front of a Lighthouse TV camera, her expression one of practiced, authoritative concern. She was beginning to deliver a statement about launching a full investigation when Jo Ansell made her final move. The image on the screen behind Reeve switched to a scanned legal document, a stock transfer certificate. It showed a significant block of shares in Gray Fathom Shipping being transferred to a blind trust under Reeve's name. Her face, projected 50 feet high for the entire city to see, turned the color of ash. She was finished. Tried and convicted in the court of public opinion before a single charge had been filed. While the politicians imploded, the enforcers fell, acting on the intel from the Black Book, a heavily armed team from the Maritime Special Authority, a state-level force that Kestrel couldn't control, hit the Sentinel Harbor Depot on Pier 17. It wasn't a fight, it was a surrender. We saw the footage later, Ronan Pike, the ghost who had haunted Sierra's steps, being led out in cuffs, his face a mask of disbelief, and in the middle of the chaos, a single moment of pure, unscripted grace, June Havel, his face streaming with tears, holding his sister Nadia in a desperate, relieved embrace. They were free. Kestrel, however, was a cornered rat, and cornered rats always run. He'd managed to slip through the panicked backstage crowd and onto a high-speed launch he kept moored for just such an occasion. He was making a break for the open sea. "He's not getting away," I said, my voice a low growl. Cass was already moving, his phone to his ear. We met him at a service dock where one of my own speedboats, a sleek, matte black vessel, was waiting, its engine already rumbling. "Sarah," I said into my comms unit as we cast off, the boat leaping forward and carving a white gash in the dark water. "Where is he?" "Joe Ansel has him on a live aerial feed." Her voice came back, clear and steady, a calm point in the swirling storm. "He's heading for the Arden Arch. She's broadcasting his coordinates live. The whole city is watching the chase." It was a brilliant move. Kestrel couldn't hide when his escape was the city's top news story. We pushed the engine to its limit, the cold spray of the river lashing our faces. We caught up to him just as he reached the massive stone gateway of the Arden Arch, the historic entrance to the harbor. Cass expertly cut him off, our boat hemming him in against the ancient stonework. Trapped. Kestrel stood on the deck of his launch, his immaculate suit now disheveled, his hair wild in the wind. He was ranting, screaming about his rights, about the lies. As I leaped across from my boat to his, he pulled a survival knife from a compartment, its serrated edge glinting in the glare of the news helicopter's spotlight. He was unsteady on his feet, a desperate man with nothing left to lose. I didn't draw a weapon. My world has rules, and one of them is you don't use a cannon to kill a fly. I moved in, deflecting his wild, clumsy slash. I twisted his wrist in a clean, dislocating motion I had learned a lifetime ago. The knife clattered to the deck. The fight was over before it began. I didn't strike him again. I simply grabbed him by the collar of his expensive jacket and dragged him, pathetic and broken, back into the light for all to see. But the night's final, devastating blow was yet to come. As the Maritime Authority took Kestrel into custody, Joe Ansel's voice cut through the airwaves again. "We have one final file, just decrypted from the Sentinel Harbor servers," she announced. There was no video, only sound. It was Kestrel's voice, cold, clear, and utterly monstrous, recorded from a hidden microphone in his office. "The device is set," his voice echoed across the river, broadcast from every speaker, every television in the city. "It will look like a tragic accident, a gang dispute on the docks gone wrong. They'll be begging me to sign that exclusive contract. They'll hand me the keys to this city just to feel safe again." A profound, collective silence fell over the crowd. The festive music had long since died. In that silence, the full, horrifying truth of his plan settled over Port Argonne. Then, the silence broke, erupting into a wave of pure, unadulterated fury. The sound was a physical thing, a roar of a city betrayed. Sirens wailed from every direction. The Harbor Commission was summarily suspended. The Bureau of Civic Integrity was slated for a full federal investigation. Kestrel's empire had not just fallen, it had been vaporized. Amid the flashing lights and the roaring crowd, I climbed back onto the main stage. Sarah was standing there, wrapped in a borrowed paramedic's blanket, looking small and overwhelmed. I walked over to her, took off my own heavy wool coat, and draped it over her shoulders. I pulled her in, and she leaned her head against my chest. We stood there together, in the eye of the storm we had created, a silent testament to the night's events. from the shadows at the edge of the stage. I saw Marina Quill watch us for a moment, a rare, gentle smile on her face, before she turned and melted back into the night. In the days that followed, the city began to heal. I quietly funded a top-tier legal team to secure the release and proper documentation for Nadia and the other workers who had been held captive by Sentinel. Sarah, along with a newly emboldened June and Nadia, used some of the seed money I provided to establish a non-profit organization, the Dockside Witness Fund, a group dedicated to providing legal aid and protection for whistleblowers and victims like Ivy. One quiet night, a week later, we were standing on the balcony of the penthouse. The air was clean, the wind carrying the familiar, comforting scent of the sea. Sarah reached up and gently touched the now fading cut on my cheek. The gesture was tender, intimate. I caught her hand, my fingers lacing through hers. "It's not my people anymore, Sarah," I said, my voice low. "It's us." She looked up at me, a universe of understanding in her dark eyes, and squeezed my hand. We were a unit, a partnership forged in ice and fire. Later, we sat wrapped together in a heavy wool blanket, the city lights a silent, glittering carpet below us. We spoke of the future, not in grand plans, but in quiet possibilities, of the Witness Fund, of June and Nadia starting a new life, of us. The kiss we shared was not born of desperation or adrenaline, but of a deep and abiding peace. Her head rested in the crook of my shoulder, her hand in mine, our breathing slowly sinking, becoming a single, steady, and Nwenda rhythm. There was no need for more. In the quiet of the night, we had finally found our sanctuary, not in a place, but in each other. In a short epilogue to the city's story, a framed photograph of Ivy Nen was hung in the main lobby of the Lighthouse TV station. The caption simply read, "A Witness." One afternoon, Sarah placed a small bouquet of sea thrift, a wildflower that grows on the rugged cliffs by the harbor, beneath the portrait. I stood behind her, my hand resting on her shoulder. It was a silent, unbreakable promise. The whispers in Port Argonne changed. They no longer spoke only of the shadows that lurked in the city's underbelly. They spoke of a new legend, of an unseen hand that had reached out from the darkness to pull justice back into the light. Those who knew, knew. And those who meant the city harm now understood that a new line had been drawn on this harbor, a boundary they would be wise never to cross. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from, so please drop a comment below to connect and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to my channel, Mafia Boss Stories. Give this video a like, and consider supporting it further by hitting the hype button to help this story be heard by more people.